They told us silence is a weakness, that to earn respect, we have to speak louder, argue better, explain more. But the truth is, the strongest person in the room is usually the quietest. Like Thomas Shelby from the series Peaky Blinders. He doesn't argue, he just looks. And that alone is enough to make the whole room go silent. Nietzsche, one of the greatest minds in philosophy, explained why. He didn't see emptiness and silence, he saw depth. And today we'll break down how silence becomes a weapon, and why we've always been losing, precisely because we tried to speak. Picture this: a young man, early 30s, working in a mid-sized office, quiet, efficient, not particularly ambitious. One day, in a team meeting, his idea is dismissed offhand by someone louder, more charming. It's not the first time, but something in him snaps. He spends the next 2 hours replaying the conversation in his head. He crafts counter-arguments he'll never say out loud. He imagines telling off his coworker, telling his boss, explaining how unfair it was. But at the end of the day, all he's done is talk to himself and feel smaller. That night, lying in bed, he thinks, maybe I should stand up for myself more. But the next morning, he does what he always does, smiles, nods, and swallows it. This isn't just about work. It happens in relationships too, when you explain again and again why something hurt you and they still don't get it. Or when you try to show someone you're enough and they just keep drifting away. And in the silence that follows, you wonder, why do I feel so powerless? Nietzsche encountered the same human pattern, but instead of playing along, he asked a radical question. What if this need to explain, to prove, to be seen, wasn't a strength, but a form of weakness? There's something deeply humiliating about having to explain yourself, not just once, but over and over. It's the emotional equivalent of begging. Please, understand me, see me, validate me. At first, it feels like honesty, like vulnerability. But soon, it turns into something else, a craving, a dependency on someone else's perception of us to feel real. And when that validation doesn't come, shame. Not because we were wrong, but because we needed them more than they needed us. This is where the anger begins to grow. A bitter kind of rage, not at them, but at ourselves. Because somewhere deep down, we know. We gave them the power to define us, and they didn't even ask for it. And the more we try to fix it with words, the worse it gets. We talk more, justify more, until our own voice starts to sound fake even to us. Nietzsche wasn't interested in comforting people. He wanted to wake them up. And this internal collapse, was exactly the kind of hidden slavery he warned us about. But let's step back for a second. Why do we do this? Why do we pour ourselves into arguments, explanations, apologies, even when no one asked? It begins in childhood, when approval was survival. If we were good, we were safe. If we were understood, we were loved. So we learned to explain, to justify, to win people over with words. But here's the twist. That strategy worked when we were 5. As adults, it becomes a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the silence where real power lives. Rationalization, over-explaining. We cling to these behaviors not because they work, but because we're terrified of what happens if we stop. Because silence means rejection, indifference, powerlessness, or does it? Society reinforces this fear. We're taught that silence is weakness, that those who speak the most are the strongest. But what if this is the lie that keeps us from real power? Nietzsche asked himself the same question. Now look at the world we live in. Social media rewards hot takes, fast replies, constant engagement. Everyone has something to say, and if you don't, people assume you have nothing to offer. In relationships, we're told, communicate more. In conflict, explain yourself better. In success, promote yourself louder. Silence in this context becomes almost suspicious. Why aren't you defending yourself? Why aren't you reacting? And yet, some of the most powerful figures in history understood the value of silence. Think of Don Corleone in The Godfather. Stoic, reserved, watchful. People feared him not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to. And this is where Nietzsche's philosophy starts to burn through the surface. Because he didn't just value silence, he weaponized it. Friedrich Nietzsche was not born into silence, he fled into it. He began as a promising academic, a young professor of classical philology at 24, dazzling his peers with brilliance. But life did not reward him with applause. He suffered from chronic illness, lost friendships, public misunderstanding, and the growing sense that his ideas were too much, too early. Eventually, he turned his back on the academic world, choosing voluntary exile, wandering the mountains of Switzerland and Italy alone, writing, thinking, watching. To most, it looked like failure. But in this solitude, he crafted some of the most radical, enduring works of philosophy ever written. Nietzsche didn't scream to be heard. He sharpened his silence into a blade. His silence was never weakness. It was refusal to conform, to explain, to make himself smaller so others would feel comfortable. He once wrote, "Talking much about oneself can also be a means to conceal oneself." In a world obsessed with transparency, Nietzsche saw self-exposure as camouflage. He believed that those who truly possess something powerful, an idea, a vision, a strength, do not feel the need to broadcast it. They hide it, they protect it. But Nietzsche's true power wasn't just in what he refused to say. It was in what he discovered because he stopped speaking. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy is one terrifying question. What if truth is not something you find, but something you create? He believed that the strongest individuals don't seek permission to exist. They become who they are, without waiting to be validated. This is what he called becoming what one is. Not being given an identity, but forging it through solitude, struggle, and silence. He saw the constant need for external affirmation as a kind of sickness. Those who explain themselves obsessively are still begging for approval, still prisoners of the herd. He warned, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And here's the sting. Those who can't do that will end up living the lives of others. To Nietzsche, silence is not withdrawal, it's a boundary. It says, I will not explain myself to those who are not ready to understand me. Think about that. How much of your life is spent trying to prove something to people who don't even want to see you clearly? Because if Nietzsche was right, then maybe we've been chasing the wrong kind of strength all along. When we don't understand the power of silence, we fall into its opposite. Overexposure. We explain ourselves too soon. We apologize when we haven't done anything wrong. We justify our choices to people who've never earned the right to question them. And we start to lose something essential, our inner ground. The moment you feel compelled to explain yourself to be accepted, you've already handed your power away. The moment you can't sit in discomfort, in being misunderstood, you've lost your center. It's subtle, but it corrodes everything. We dilute our convictions to fit in. We overshare to feel less alone. We talk ourselves into invisibility. And modern life makes it worse. We live on timelines. We perform for likes. We confuse expression with connection. But the one who can hold their silence even when falsely judged, that person radiates something others can't quite name and can't ignore. And this is where the real trap begins, because what looks like self-expression often hides something much more desperate. So, what do we do when we feel misunderstood? We talk, we explain, we argue, we defend. It feels like a solution, but it's a trap, because the more we explain ourselves, the more we reveal where we're vulnerable. We show our doubts. We expose our emotional need to be seen. And the moment someone senses that need, they can use it. Think about an argument with someone who refuses to understand you. You start explaining yourself louder, longer, with more passion. But it doesn't work, not because you're wrong, but because they never wanted clarity. They wanted control. In these moments, every extra word becomes a rope you're tying around yourself. They pull and you react. They provoke and you defend. And now they're in charge. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process they do not become a monster." But when we try to win arguments with those who don't play fair, we become like them. Loud, reactive, weak. It's not that we speak too little. It's that we speak to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And this is where the real danger begins, when false strength replaces true clarity. Here's the tragedy. We confuse noise for confidence. We mistake reaction for power. We think the loudest person in the room is the strongest. But that's not confidence. It's insecurity in disguise. True strength doesn't need a spotlight. And we confuse other things too. We think kindness is always about being soft. That love means explaining ourselves endlessly. That maturity is being open with everyone. But Nietzsche flips that. To him, real strength often looks cold, detached, because it's focused inward, not outward, not on pleasing others, but on preserving self-mastery. He wasn't advocating arrogance or cruelty. He was saying, only those who can hold their own silence can truly know what they believe. There's a moment in every conflict, every conversation, where you feel the pull to explain, to justify. But if you pause, if you resist, you take the power back. You stop being a performer. You become a presence. But to really feel this, to truly see what silence can do, we need a story. Imagine two men in a crowded market. One, loud and animated, pointing fingers, shouting accusations. The other, silent, calm, holding eye contact, but saying nothing. The crowd watches. They expect a fight. But the silent man doesn't move, doesn't flinch, doesn't justify. Eventually, the loud one runs out of breath. His anger starts to look ridiculous. Because without opposition, there's no conflict. Without reaction, his words collapse. The silent man turns and walks away. Not because he was weak, but because he knew. The moment he speaks, he descends to the fool's level. In many Zen teachings, this is the essence of mastery. The ability to walk away without needing the last word. Nietzsche, too, admired the warrior who doesn't draw their sword unnecessarily. Because they don't need to prove they could win. Their silence already says it. And that brings us to the most uncomfortable truth of all. Here it is. Most people talk not to be understood, but to avoid being alone with their own mind. We fill silence with noise, not because we have something meaningful to say, but because we're terrified of what we might hear in the quiet. A scrolling feed, a podcast in the background music, chatter, anything. Because silence leaves us face to face with something far more intimidating than the judgment of others. Our own unfiltered self. Silence isn't hard because it's empty. It's hard because it's full of things we try to avoid. Doubt, shame, fear, the unfinished questions, the memories that sting, the quiet voice that asks, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. It's the voice that calls out your lies to yourself. The moments you betrayed your own values to be liked. The times you said yes just to avoid rejection. The mask you've worn so long, you've forgotten what's underneath. Nietzsche believed that this silence is where the real work happens, where the individual is forged, where identity isn't borrowed or copied, but built, not through agreement with others, but through confrontation with oneself. He said, "You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes?" In silence, you burn. In silence, you face the raw truth. And in silence, you transform. It's not a comfortable place. It's the psychological equivalent of standing naked in a storm. But it's also the only place where strength that cannot be taken is born. This is the place most people never reach. They keep talking, keep performing, keep running. But those who stay, who endure the silence, become unshakable. So how do you win without ever speaking? let's answer the question we started with. You win by not playing the game they expect. You win by removing their favorite weapon, your reaction. You win by not needing the approval they think you want. Because silence is a mirror. It reflects the other person's chaos back to them. It denies them the validation of your pain. And when they throw a hook and you don't flinch, you force them to see themselves, unshielded, without distraction. This isn't about passive aggression. It's about psychological sovereignty. It's about refusing to let someone else's dysfunction write your script. Think of powerful people you've seen, real or fictional. John Wick, Don Corleone, even Batman. They don't fight every battle. They don't talk to fill the silence. They speak rarely, but when they do, it cuts through everything. Why? Because silence builds weight. And when you don't give your energy away freely, people pay attention when you finally speak. They lean in. Because you've trained the room, your voice is earned, but there's more. Silence is not just an interpersonal strategy, it's a metaphysical stance. Silence is a statement. It says, I don't owe you my truth. I don't need to be understood. I am not here to be consumed. That's not arrogance, that's self-possession. It's knowing that value doesn't shout, that truth doesn't beg to be believed. It's how you outsmart anyone, without a single word. Not by overpowering them, but by becoming immune to the games they play. But there's one final shift, without which silence becomes isolation. One more piece Nietzsche understood better than anyone. Silence is not about withdrawing from the world forever. It's about returning on your own terms. There's a danger in misreading this message. Some use silence as a wall, a defense mechanism, a retreat into bitterness. But that's not strength, that's surrender. Nietzsche was no hermit. He walked alone, yes, but not to escape. He suffered deeply from loneliness, illness, misunderstanding. And yet, he chose solitude, not as an escape from others, but as a return to self. Because true silence isn't hollow, it's creative, it's regenerative. It's the space where you stop reacting and start seeing, not through the eyes of others, but through your own. He used solitude to sharpen his soul, to reconnect, not with noise, but with vision. In his isolation, Nietzsche gave birth to his most radical ideas. Ideas that still shape modern thought. He didn't wait to be understood. He spoke from a place beyond the need for permission. The final goal is not silence for silence's sake. It's to build such inner clarity that when you do speak, you speak from truth, not fear. You don't talk to fill space. You speak to shape it. Every word becomes deliberate. Every silence becomes a choice. This is the transformation, from someone who explains to someone who embodies, from someone who reacts to someone who leads without needing to shout. And in a world addicted to noise, that kind of silence is the loudest thing there is. If this video resonates with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. How many times have you noticed that the more you talk, the less people listen? How have you felt? If you want to keep exploring insights from the greatest minds in history, hit the subscribe button and watch the next video. Let's stay together, because something truly important is coming in the next episode.